Thank you to all of you for joining us today. It's a great group of people, great day, great location, and I appreciate everybody who's joining us virtually from all over the world. Where is everybody joining us from? Let us know in the chat. We'd love to know because I know we had registrations from Australia, Europe, and I don't know where else. We'd love to know where you're joining us from. My name is Varun Chandak. I'm the founder and president of Access to Success, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all back to the first in person event Access to Success has organized since 2019. Something strange happened in 2020. You might remember, I'm not sure. So I'm glad to be seeing so many of you friendly faces in person and virtually. Before we really dive into today's discussion, I want to take a moment to recognize that Toronto is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis. Let's continue to recognize and deeply appreciate the historic connections of Indigenous peoples to this place and other places as we move forward in the spirit of reconciliation. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. This event is being recorded. Let me just confirm with my colleagues here, we're good to go. So I know this has been one of the most popular questions already, so I can confirm that this event is being recorded and we will share a recording with all of you attendees later on. Live captioning is available courtesy of Microsoft Teams. If you would like to turn that on, please use the three dots on your screen and use turn on live captions. And for the people who are joining us virtually, if I could request you to please stay on mute, I would greatly appreciate that. Now, if I can ask my colleague from Microsoft, Damien, to come in and share a couple of housekeeping items for those joining us in person, that'd be great. Damien.
Thank you.
Thank you, Varun, and thank you everyone for joining both in person, but also virtually as well, or having this hybrid experience. We're really excited and fortunate to have all of you in our space. I don't know if this is for those that are here in person, your first time. We're relatively new. We're just over a year old now, so we're always welcoming folks back in, and then hopefully, maybe later on in networking, taking the pleasant views all around as well. For those online, maybe we could take a couple photos and share as well. So just for those in house and housekeeping, just directly behind you, if you go down the hallway and turn to your left, that's where there are washrooms. So at break time or any point, you can go towards the back and then turn left and then go use the facilities there. And then generally this whole space on the 43rd floor is for you as well. So happy to network and explore that area of the building as well. But ultimately, have fun. The way that we like to, or I heard my colleague Galen mention this once as well, but the way that we like to say is that this isn't Microsoft's office, this is Canada's office. So this space is really yours during this time, and we are fortunate to have you both virtually and in person as well. So thank you really for considering us.
Thank you, Damien. Give it up for Damien, please. He helped us organize this event. Okay. Um, Before we dive into the agenda for today, I want to take a second and ask, especially the folks joining us here in person, how many of you, have any of you had an interesting conversation or met an interesting person here while you were waiting for the event to start? Put your hand up or let us know in any way. Okay, most of you, that's great to hear. The reason I'm asking that is because, as you know, there is a networking component at the end of this event for those joining us in person. And I want to encourage you to meet new people, to make new friends, to have some interesting conversations. My goal for you today is maybe you learn something new, something interesting. Maybe you meet somebody new, somebody interesting, or you have a topic of conversation that you leave with and you think, I want to know more about that. I want to talk to somebody about that. That's my goal for you today. So I encourage you to do that towards the end of today's session. So, who are we? And why did we bother you all to join us today? Well, we are Access to Success, Toronto based not for profit. we support the development of future leaders with disabilities and assistive technology. As many of you may already know, we also run what's called ATS Labs, which is Canada's first accelerator for accessibility startups. We've been in existence since 2016 in some shape or form, but we organized our first pilot project back in 2019, which was our first and the last event that we had in person. We did one project, one virtual cohort in 21, and we did one in 22. Now let me see some representation here, people joining us virtually and in person. How many of you have been involved in ATS Labs in some shape or form, or as a speaker, as a participant, or as a mentor? I see a few hands going up, maybe, hopefully, a few hands going up somewhere virtually as well. Um, Encourage you all to talk to these folks to learn more about their experiences instead of me just, sharing a lot of nice things about ATS Labs. What it is that we actually do. We provide programming and resources and mentorship and opportunities that are specifically designed for startups serving people with disabilities. To date, we have had 3 cohorts of over 30 startups in total. We've hosted over 100 masterclasses to date, which were hosted or spoken at by more than 130 speakers from more than 7 countries around the world. We're fortunate to be building a lot of global partnerships from organizations around the world, including groups like the Inclusive Innovation Network, which I had the great pleasure of co-founding, Techstars Foundation, Smart Job, and all of these collaborations, these partnerships are being designed and built specifically so that we can help startups serving people with disabilities scale. The idea is not just to promote entrepreneurship as an idea. The idea is not just to promote innovation and accessibility as an idea. The idea is to actually help startups scale and become sustainable so that they continue to last for longer than 5 years, 10 years, 50 years, and continue to benefit more than 10 people, 50 people, 50,000 people. Let me share a little bit of context on that. Um, we've had startups from all over Canada and North America that have gone through the program. These are more than 30 startups ranging from disability tech, age tech, neurotech, care tech, hair tech, wearables, BCI, and probably a lot of other cool sounding words that I'm forgetting right now. These are the startups, these are the people who are making the real impact in the world. What is that impact? That impact is that across these 30 something startups, they've raised more than $13 million in funding. They've generated over $3 million in revenue. And they've taken these resources to go out and benefit over 500,000 people with disabilities to date cumulatively. To those of you who are building those startups, to those of you who are doing that work, my tip of the metaphorical hat to you. Okay, so what else? Well, I want to take a moment and thank the people and the groups who are helping us make this work possible. Our proud sponsor is CIBC, so I want to take a moment to thank CIBC, without whom the work that we do would be very, very difficult to do. So thank you to our partners at CIBC. And of course, I would be remiss to not thank our dear friends at Microsoft, who've not only lent us this beautiful location, this beautiful space, but have also given us a lot of other support that will take me a long time to recount. In fact, I'll talk about a little bit of that support in the latter half of today's conversation when I talk about the Accessibility Investors Database, but that's for later. Now, for the folks who are here with us virtually, I want to encourage you to share your thoughts with us in the chat, to let us know your questions in the chat. As we continue today's agenda, I want all of you, both here in person and virtually, to participate in this conversation. We don't want this to be just people talking at you. And with that, let's go to today's first speaker of the day, Paula Gamble. Paula Gamble is currently the Founders Hub Startup Program Lead at Microsoft Canada. She loves to connect with and learn from founders, incubators, and startup communities across the country. Paula gets great energy from discovering the unique ways startups choose to drive innovation and impact. She brings insight into technical and go to market partnerships and collaborations, and has deep passion for building connections across startups, venture capital, and enterprise spaces across Canada. Paula, I know you're joining us virtually from Vancouver, so over to you.
Hi, can you hear me in the room okay? Yes, awesome. Okay, I'm going to assume silence is
Yes, we can. Yeah.
perfect. I'm just going to share a couple of slides with you if that's okay. But thank you so much for having me today. How's everyone doing? I'm assuming good as well. Again, you're on the other side. I apologize I can't be there in person. I was really looking forward to this event, but I'm actually out in Vancouver just visiting extended family, so hope it's amazing in person, and thank you again for having me virtually. As you mentioned, so I lead our Founders Hub program for Microsoft Canada. I get the privilege of supporting early stage startups that are partnering with Microsoft in their growth journey. And I wanted to just chat with you briefly today before the really exciting panel on how we can help you with your startups as you go through the ideation and build process if that's something that you're interested in. And also just touch on briefly some of the other resources that Microsoft has available. After this call, if there's ever any questions that come up on the program or how Microsoft likes to work with startups or accessibility related questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me afterwards. I want to make sure that these slides are also shared after the presentation so you have access to those. So the Founders Hub program, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, is a program targeting our early stage startups across Canada. The program launched about 1.5 years ago after the many iterations of the different startup programs that Microsoft's had, with a really interesting new flavor to it. So I wanted to just bring to mind some of the resources that we have available for startups in Canada, including Azure credits, which is always a big one, up to $150,000 US. You also get access to the full Microsoft ecosystem, including Microsoft 365, GitHub, Visual Studio, and many of our amazing other products. In addition, you also get access to some of the many Microsoft partnership offers that we have, including OpenAI, which I'm sure some of you have heard of as it's in the news quite a bit recently. So if anyone's interested in learning a little bit more about that, let me know. I've also just put a QR code on the slides if you want to take a look during this call or afterwards. And then my favorite part of the program is really the hands-on resources that are provided. As startups go through the process of building, ideating it, and validating product market fit, leveraging experts is super important wherever possible to make sure that both technically and on the business go-to-market side, you're set up for success. So as an accessibility focused startup, I think this is definitely a crucial piece when it comes to making sure that it lands with whatever desired community you're looking to support, but also just within the broader market of building that out. So there's many different resources available. One of them I wanted to flag on the technical side is you get access to the entire Microsoft ecosystem from a support perspective. So we have a team that's able to support you, really get going, get started. Lots of information on here, but if it's really just those really introductory questions, we have something called the Azure Technical Advisory. It's a team of architects that you're able to leverage unlimited the entire time that you're in the program at no cost. Or if you want to go deeper into more advanced AI accessibility related questions, if you want to talk about machine learning or other more architecture related, we have people that can support there. And something I'm really excited about is the launch of something called our Expert Network. Individuals across Microsoft globally have put their hand up to support startups however they can in their different expertise spaces. So you can actually go directly into Founders Hub once you're part of the program and leverage experts across the Microsoft network that have different know-how, both technically on the business side, industry side, or otherwise. The reason I wanted to share all of this with you today is this space is really, really exciting for me, and I'm super passionate about the work that many of you do, and I'm looking forward to the conversation today. I think inclusive design is really important and comes down to kind of three main principles here at Microsoft that are particularly important for any business, but primarily I think for startups as you're going through that design process. So in the inclusive design framework here at Microsoft, we have three main principles, and I'm sure that this isn't news to anyone. An ability to recognize exclusion is number one. How are we learning from diversity? And then solving for one and extending to many. So when we're looking at design, iteration, and building on ideas, sometimes this isn't really always top of mind. And I think when we're able to take the learnings that we have across a group of people that is really the many, we're able to understand how through intentional design we're able to build products that really are supportive for the audience that we're looking to support. So a lot of this is really top of mind on our side when we look at AI and how that's been influencing the community. Back in 2018, Microsoft actually announced the launch of AI for Accessibility, which has been a 5-year program dedicated to supporting the powers of AI and machine learning. This program, part of our AI for Good initiative, actually provides Microsoft Cloud and AI technologies to those working to address some of the biggest spaces that we have for improving accessibility and accessibility-related products. So also wanted to flag, in addition to Founders Hub, which I care about deeply here in Canada, AI for Accessibility as well through Microsoft. We have different grants and resources about how to use AI ethically, intentionally, and from an inclusive design perspective. So I want to make sure that these are shared after the conversation as well, so you have all of these resources, but just want to close quickly before we go into the panel discussion on just one piece. Inclusive design doesn't mean that you're designing one thing for all people. You're designing a diversity of ways to participate so that everyone has a sense of belonging. And I'm so excited about today's conversation. This is really, really top of mind, I think, for hopefully all startups across the country, but I'm looking forward to seeing the work that you're doing. And again, if anyone has any questions today, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on the Founders Hub program, some of the AI for Accessibility resources that we have here in Canada, and other ways that Microsoft can help support you in your growth journey. So thank you again, and I'll turn it back over to Varun in the room. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paula, for joining us and for sharing these resources. We really appreciate it. Everybody, please give it up for Paula Gamble from Microsoft. Hey, as we move on to the next component of today's session, I want to just make a very brief announcement. We have some food over here, but one of the cookie boxes contains peanuts. Just wanted to point that out. We are sticking a label on it just so people here know. Okay, so now if I can invite our panelists, Catherine Wurzman and Dr. Sohaib Siddiqui, up to the front of the stage, please. Thank you so much. Let's stop sharing this. Damien, can I get some help if you're still here? Stop screen sharing. There we go. Okay, great. Sorry.
Yeah, this is going right now.
Oh, the joys of doing in-person events again after not doing it for 4 years. All right, well, Catherine, so here, welcome. I want to start off with a quick introduction. Catherine Wurzman is the founder and managing partner of Amplify Capital, a Canadian impact venture fund focused on early stage technology companies solving for climate sustainability, improved education, and better health. Catherine has spent most of her career in investing, including at CIBC Capital, Constellation Ventures, MetLife, and Social Venture Partners, which she founded in 2008. Today, Catherine leads the team of six covering two funds and is active across a North American portfolio of 21 investments, including Inkblot Therapy, Lucid, Muzoom, and others. Dr. Sohaib Siddiqui is a doctor, clinical researcher, investor, and advisor with expansive experience in healthcare innovation and investments. He is currently an entrepreneur in residence at the Toronto Innovation Acceleration Partners, or TIAP, an EIR for the Temulti Faculty of Medicine, holds an academic appointment at Women's College Hospital, and serves on several boards. He also has experience in managing investments alongside private equity, family offices, venture funds, and incubators. Catherine and Sohaib, I don't know where you find the time, but I'm glad you found a little bit of time for us and for coming over. Thank you for joining us today. Um, Welcome. We promised our participants here that we'd get the most out of this time and that we'd want to hear from investors who have a track record in investing in the space. So why don't we dive right in? Can you tell us a little bit about your investments in the accessibility, disability, and related spaces? Catherine, why don't we start from you?
Okay. So I have to say we haven't made an investment that particularly solves for accessibility or disability. The challenge I'll say we have, to be perfectly blunt, is that the number of people with disabilities that are served by any one particular product or service. So we haven't seen a disability platform that covers multiple disabilities. It's usually targeted to physical accessibility or mental disability. So one that covers all of them. We haven't seen that, and the ones that are targeted to the specific, I'll call it disability areas, the market's too small. So it's a good thing, means that there's not, the population set is small, but it's not good for the people who are in that population set. So it makes traditional venture capital funding very difficult because yes, we are an impact fund and everything we do is we screen for impact, but we also are looking for that market return. And in order to get a market return, we have to go after big markets, and disability has, where we've seen it, has fallen under that big market threshold. Having said that, though, I'd like to think that we are going to see more and more investment opportunities that do cross different disability um, areas, and so that there will be better market opportunities for a financial investment. You mentioned Inkblot and Lucid. So a lot of the things we're doing in health specifically and education is focusing on underserved populations. And broadly, we look at underserved economic, like, economic or geographic, or, people with disabilities. And so using technology to deliver better education or better health to remote populations or people that can't get downtown to a hospital, for example, or can't go to private school for financial reasons, all sorts of barriers. We look to invest in those opportunities that serve broadly the underserved. So I'm hopeful that some of the investments that we're making are reaching people with disabilities, but just not as a as a pointed direct category, more of a broadly underserved. So that was a long answer to your question, and there for now.
No, thank you. We'll come back to you because I would love to hear a little bit more about how you think about lucid Inkblot therapy and Muzoom, because from where I am sitting, we count that within the big disability market. So I'd love to come back to you on that. But Sohaib, please, we'd love to hear from you as well.
Sure. Well, Catherine, great to be on this panel with you, and certainly echo, a lot of the sentiments you've shared. Catherine and I are friends. We've known for each other for a while, and we've done a lot of stuff together. So this is great. This is more just like catching up on coffee. So this is what it kind of feels like. So thank you again for having the two of us. So to answer your question, so my roles kind of span across a few things. So my job is really to help early stage companies, and a lot of them aren't even companies. It's really IP. So a lot of the people that kind of come to us in my role at TAP is I have an idea and I want to target a patient population. Sometimes it's a drug, or sometimes it's even a molecule. It's not even a company. It's like I have a molecule. I don't even know where to put it. So my job is really to help package the entity, make it into a company, make it into a viable commercial kind of entity. You know, find a CEO, put in additional investing, create an IP portfolio around it. So it's a lot of the uplift early on, and of course, many of the companies that we come across, I'd say access to care is certainly a theme that all companies, or at least most companies in healthcare, are trying to address. But within that portfolio, I do want to highlight some that I think would be tremendously relevant to kind of our conversation here today. So um, we worked extensively with a hospital called Home Bloorview, and I see Andrea Palmer in the audience. Andrea has been working with the team out of Home Bloorview to work and kind of accelerate um, some IP around anxiety management. And the what I find really interesting about it is certainly anxiety is and Andrea, I'm not going to do justice, so apologies, but really kind of my takeaway is you know this issue affects all people, and certainly people with intellectual disability. It affects them differently because they're often not able to kind of communicate what's on top of mind. And what ends up happening is these patients are going to behave in ways at least we may perceive it as inappropriate and ends up in kind of, you know, sometimes violent or aggressive confrontations. So here is an algorithm that can kind of predict before episodes of, heightened anxiety or arousal kind of happen, by using AI metrics on kind of heart rate variability. We're able to kind of predict and prevent, or at least identify, saying, hey, every time during this day, if I open this door, and that is a trigger for this particular patient. Opening this door from this particular vantage point results in a hyper aroused state. Using AI and data, you can go back and say, hey, this is a recurring theme. We should do something about it. And Andrea will do much more better justice, and she's got a tremendous amount of data to prove that simple data can help patients in a very meaningful way. The other company that I want to highlight is Pearl Interactives, which I think was a cohort of you guys last year or the year before, I think.
Well, went through our 2022 cohort.
Yeah, so I've been working with the Pearl team. I actually sit on their board. We actually made an investment in Pearl across a few things. So Pearl Interactive is really it's a platform designed for children of varying abilities, I would say. In the beginning, it was focused on cerebral palsy. I think that's probably the low-hanging fruit that the team was going after. And I think the idea behind it is, children with varying abilities cannot always play games and enjoy entertainment in the way that other children can. Some of them have functional limitations, some of them have physical limitations, and it does really exclude them. Like, we might think of the PlayStation as something for granted and we can always play with it, but if you have a child at home who has varying abilities, and that one kid can't play the PlayStation, it's a tremendous kind of impact in their life. So really what Pearl Interactive is designed to do is help um, you know really bring all kids to a certain level. So it's an interesting technology that allows you to play games. So for something like, if you remember, like the Nintendo Wii, I don't know if someone in the audience would played it, playing tennis. So for a child with cerebral palsy, lifting your hand up may not actually be possible for them. So we can actually kind of tailor made and kind of adjust the functional requirements to mimic something like a tennis swing. So maybe an action like this is enough for another child, right? So we found this team really, really interesting, really cool technology. Similar challenges, Catherine, that you talked about is, you have a technology in cerebral palsy. Is that, not to say it's not insignificant, but can we find an ROI? It's challenging.
Thank you. That is incredibly insightful and interesting. And I have about 3 dozen follow-up questions for both of you, but I'm trying to manage our time a little bit. I also want to pause for a second and just point out to folks here who might be wondering, why do I keep looking down here? I'm hard of hearing, and I heavily rely on lip reading. So moderating this discussion would have been very difficult for me if not for the live captions available for me here through Microsoft Teams. So folks, if anybody else is having a little bit of trouble or just want captions, please feel free to turn them on. This is for those who are joining us virtually, of course. Okay, so we touched upon two things. One, the potential perception of disability as not being potentially affecting a lot of people, the size of the market really, and the passion with which you clearly speak about Pearl and the commitment that you've already made to Muzoom, to all these companies. What is it that you're seeing here that other investors are missing? What's your why? Why are you interested in these startups? I'd like to go back to you, Sohaib.
So I think once again it's if you are in this space, I think it's about being creative with your go-to-market strategy. I think I've talked to Matt before. I've talked to a lot of you in the audience, so I'm going to point out people. I'm sorry, but you know, I think it's it's interesting in that technologies are not always designed for one indication or one patient population. I think ultimately at the end of the day, if you want your company to be successful, investors will always ask about indication number two. You've got your low hanging fruit. What's the market that you can show a good ROI on? But they're going to say, what's the bigger market? And I think this is something that I think we've always encouraged a lot of our startups in the accessibility space is you have a market that is there's dire need for it. There's a large delta of value you can add to that particular market because there's not too many other options or technologies available to them. But can you translate this technology to a broader audience, to a broader indication? So, in the case of Pearl, which, maybe it's focused on cerebral palsy, can you translate this technology and enter into a larger gaming space? Can you get into the stroke space? Can you get into rehab, rotator cuff tears? Those are, those are big markets. And they would also have functional limitations. So, I view it as how much impact can you make on each particular indication? And a lot of these patients, they don't have too many other alternative strategies. I mean, how many times have you, I don't mean to knock on any stroke company, or I don't want to knock onto any, neurotech company, but take stroke, there's hundreds and thousands of companies working on solving stroke, and it is an important issue. But there's probably not hundreds of thousands of companies solving cerebral palsy or cochlear implants or whatever have you. ROI, right?
The more stroke patient, more stroke victims.
Well, yeah, I think it also comes down to our healthcare, how our healthcare system is designed, right? Like we don't design for prevention, we don't design for public health, we design for acute issues. I live very, I live very close to a trauma center. The helicopters are landing all day long. You know, we 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 do very well when you have a stroke. We do very well when you get stabbed or shot, but we do very poorly when we talk about access and equity. A lot of the issues, Catherine, I think your fund is trying to address, right?
Thank you. Catherine?
Okay, great. So I'll come back to the why and what we see differently. So my personal why is I was in traditional finance, traditional private equity for years, and the money goal just wasn't doing it for me. And I got involved in social venture partners in New York, and it was an opportunity for me to use my business skills for nonprofits, so local community support and impact, helping those nonprofits think like a business. So scaling, marketing, sales, etc. And I got really excited about the power of business for good. So ultimately, that landed me in impact investing as a combination of finance and doing good. But the reality is, um, I care deeply about making an impact. I want my legacy to be not how much money I accumulated, but the impact I was able to have on other people. Say something?
Yes, let me dig in on that a little
Yeah.
bit. Um, Making an impact versus, and I'm going to be a little bit on the nose about it, making money as a venture capitalist.
Yeah.
How do you balance it?
Yeah. So here's how I balance it. The Amplify and Amplify Capital is about amplifying impact investing so that we can prove to the world that you can make money and do good with the same dollar. We are going for making a ton of money on our investment thesis of impact investing because the more money we make, the more people will say, hey, what's she doing over there? She's making a lot of money with that investment strategy. Why don't we do that too? I can't really claim that KKR and Apollo decided to open impact funds because of Amplify Capital, but the idea is there's more money coming into the space. The more we can demonstrate financial returns, the more true, our sales, I'll say singular financial money will get it. They'll say, oh, maybe we can make money over here in this impact investing space, and then more money comes into the space and we solve our problems. We can put more money into climate health education, accessibility, etc. Everything. So we stop solving for getting your takeout food faster and we start solving for strokes.
So let's tie that into a couple of the investments that you've made in Lucid and in blood therapy, both with an overlap in mental health. Can you talk a little bit more about your approach to them? What convinced you about them that was missing in other disability or mental health startups?
Yeah. So Inkblot's my favorite story because it's the one where we had such a big role. We invested in 2018, and then again in 2019, and then during COVID as well. And I even had to try and convince this guy over here, and he's like, I'm not so sure, right? So, early days as in 2018, traditional investors didn't see the market opportunity for mental health. Now, there's the whole idea of diversity in female-led funds. So I had experience seeing a therapist, and in particular, going back to the hospital, doing postpartum support and care. And for any of you who've had a baby in the room, getting your newborn wrapped up in the middle of winter, going to try and make an appointment on time is like a Herculean feat. And so it was very difficult to the appointment, but it was really important, and I made it. Times late, and it was just it was a struggle, and it's a struggle because you're dealing with the mental health issue, you're dealing with a crying baby. This is my own personal issue, right? So crying baby, mental health issue, trying to park and get through the snow and get to the hospital is just was a very big challenge. And so I saw what a huge benefit going online and speaking to a therapist from the comfort of my home without all that headache and hassle. And then I put myself in the shoes of someone way less fortunate than me, maybe someone with a disability or someone who living far away, maybe someone who doesn't have a car, maybe someone who has 3 kids, all sorts of, they could layer on a ton and say, wow, this would be a massive benefit. And then you don't always have to see them during 9 to 5. You can see them anytime that suits you. And on top of it, the cost is cut into, I think it was a quarter of the cost of a traditional therapist. And so it was just, ding, 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 checks all the boxes. So it just automatically, I saw the opportunity and I wasn't afraid to share that, I could see myself using this, right? And the traditional venture capital at the time, even more so, was, a very macho persona. And so so I took my personal experience and then we backed it up with facts. So we did the research on the market and the constraints and the issue for corporations on sick days and leaves of absences and short-term disability leading to long-term disability and the government spending on mental health and there's crime and homelessness, mental health weaves throughout many areas of our society. And so just layering on the investment thesis became so clear. Huge market, huge loss of revenues and spending, and multi-stakeholder benefits, right? Because if people get the care they need sooner, they're better, they can function in their family because there's secondary effects like secondhand smoking, there's secondhand mental health effects to the family, and then or going back to work faster. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
Thank you for sharing that. That was a personal story, and I appreciate you sharing that. Thank you. It's very, very interesting that you bring up the aspect of mental health not being a mental health problem, but an everybody problem. Because those of you who've been listening to my spiel for a few years now, I've been saying that in the era leading up to the pandemic, people started realizing mental health is not a mental health problem; it's an everybody problem. Now, with regulation, businesses are realizing digital accessibility is not a vision loss problem; it's everybody's problem. And my push that I've been trying to push is that disability and accessibility is not a disability problem. It's an everybody problem. But that's my opinion. And we are here to listen to the people with the capital.
Mm.
So let's. Sorry, you were going to say add something there?
Well, you say it's an everybody problem. I mean, what we're learning, I mean, it's obvious to you, is like you miss out on this great talent, right? If you don't open the door to everybody of all abilities, you miss out on amazing talent.
Um, so uh, so hey, you've made investments beyond mental health also, and Pearl and healthcare delivery, health remote care monitoring. Um, Talk to us about what it is that you heard these founders say that convinced you about the market size versus other founders where you weren't convinced. I'm curious, what's that sort of the line in the sand where you say, okay, this is a venture scalable business and this is, and how do you think about that?
Yeah. So I'm gonna maybe I'll get a bit technical here, but I'm gonna use oncology as an example. So kind of go along with this, right? So, you know, in oncology, there's certain cancers that we do a decent job in treating. There's others that we do abysmally. So I'll take, for example, breast cancer. Now, breast cancer very common. Certainly, many of us, have some relationship or interaction, know someone who's been, affected, perhaps even died. Um, I don't mean to undermine the importance and the kind of the issue around breast cancer, but generally, from a clinical perspective, we do really well treating breast cancer. We've got screening; it's standardized. You have a stage 3 tumor, we know exactly what to do with it. Pancreatic cancer, it's kind of a late stage game. It's more of let's get your affairs in order, let's extend life by a couple of months. So there's sharp contrast to it. Now, how does that translate to kind of your question? So when I look at companies, I kind of think of, okay, if they have a technology, is this a technology that is going to be like curing breast cancer, where the technology might add 2 or 3% benefit, or is this going to be a technology that's going to add 30% benefit in a population that has nothing else to do here, or no other viable alternative, right? Like that's how I kind of think of it. So adding 1 or 2% points in improving the care of a certain patient group is interesting, but that's where you're not going to get the ROI. If I think they can improve access to care, or impact, or improve outcomes, reduce morbidity, reduce costs, reduce mortality. Like if they can move this 20, 30%, even if it's a niche population, take a cerebral palsy, once again, as a touch point. If you can meaningfully move it more than kind of a large standard deviation, I find that really impactful, because I see so many companies, hundreds and thousands of companies. I meet thousands of companies in a year. Like so many of them, where when you actually do the analysis, they might only make a 2-3% impact on the bottom line. But that's why I like some of these niche kind of markets where you can actually make a very large impact and be very meaningful. And not every company has got to reach that $1 billion number that we've been kind of ascribed to kind of aim for. It's always nice to put it on a pitch deck, but in reality, I think, Catherine, I mean, how many of your companies have reached $1 billion valuations? And by the way, Catherine's very experienced. Catherine's been doing impact investing before it was even cool. So I think Catherine knows how to do some of this stuff.
Made it cool.
Yeah, she made it cool, obviously.
We'll
No,
come to those exit valuations.
yeah, right. But you know what I mean? Like it not everything has to be this $1 billion kind of thing. Find a market, make sure you're making an impact, make sure you're serving the patient, make sure you're finding a way to make money doing it, and don't bother the healthcare system too much. Like they're overburdened. Try to fit into their workflow. Don't be kind of divergent from it. The pandemic has pushed healthcare even to its brink, right? So you have to kind of work with.
So I'm glad you decided to get a little bit technical because one of the things that you said at the very end there is find a way to make money from it. Now, there are two very, very common problems that I'm seeing in the market that you might have noticed as well. One is that it's hard to charge people for some of these innovations. The other is the opposite end of the spectrum, especially in hardware. That the hardware is far too expensive. The upfront cost of it is $3,000, and so a lot of the startups, a lot of the founders struggle with either the initial go to market, or even if they manage that initial go to market, sort of scaling beyond their first 10, 20, 50 customers. What are you seeing in the market that's successful that you're telling your entrepreneurs that you work with? What advice do you give them, Catherine?
Uh,
Do your best to stay away from those capital intensive, those hardware based supports, I'll call them, or products and services. It's really tough. And I know, around mobility, it's impossible. Like there's no, I don't see a digital opportunity for mobility challenges. So if those ones are just are what I tell them, frankly, and this because we've looked at a number of them over and over, is that it's just not a venture capital opportunity, and that's okay. It should be they need to talk to find different loan opportunities or government grant opportunities or partner with other hardware manufacturers. Um, that or aligned, big partnerships with in someone in the industry that's already doing something similar. Um, because not every deal is a venture capital deal. The unfortunate thing is that venture capital has been kind of glorified. There's TV shows, there's movies, there's people like Elon Musk and others that it looks very sexy and exciting. It looks like we really, don't work. It's a lot of work on the other side. But just because it's been glorified doesn't mean that every company should be VC backed.
For sure. That was actually going to be one of my later questions about what about businesses that you feel are not venture scalable. So I'll circle back to that a little bit as well. But so, hey, what about you in terms of these businesses where you might see the market potential, but the go to market or scalability because of the pricing issues are a little bit difficult? What would you tell those founders?
Yeah. So once again, I'll agree with Catherine on it. It's a difficult business, but sometimes there's no way around it, right? Like that sometimes the reality is to solve a particular problem, you are going to have to make a clunky large device or a box or something that's got to sit and someone's got to pay a couple $1,000s for it, right? Like sometimes there's, you know, like so this is a problem that we have at Pearl. So Pearl Interactive, it's kind of a video game and it has to reside in, the home of the family, and then there's a capital cost, a couple of $1,000 up front. um, Obviously, the goal is to have the capital cost and have a bit of recurring SaaS revenue, a couple $100 a month. But who pays for that first couple of $1,000s, right? Like, not every family can afford that. And, people as a family, you need to see massive ROI on that investment. So I'll be honest, like, this is something we've struggled with at Pearl. So in that way, we have not gone to the venture capitalists for this. And to Catherine's point, not everything is venture backable because that's an upfront, investment that needs to be made. And venture capital is not the only way to make money, right? So, a lot of things that we explore are obviously strategic partnerships. In the case of Pearl, Canadian Tire actually had a kind of a philanthropic pocket of money that they want to kind of put money into. So, through some of their discussions, we've had conversations with Canadian Tire supporting things. Um, I also think, the idea of kind of private family. So one of the other groups I work with are kind of private family offices, who are kind of, they're their own kind of organization. They're their own kind of pocket of money here in Toronto and around the world. Um, and a lot of them are impact driven. A lot of these families have means. There's a lot of wealth in Toronto. You know, Healthcare is something that affects all family members. This is just the fact of being mortal. Like, so I think many of these families have means. There's hundreds of millions of dollars of capital sitting in very siloed pockets, and these families are willing to put money towards it. So, we do network quite extensively with family offices, and it can actually be a good ROI, and it can be cheaper. And this is, I'm going to sound contradictory to our roles here. It's cheaper to get money than it is from venture capitalists, right? Like venture capital is probably the most expensive kind of pocket of money to go to. Um, so I think you have to come to the realization of, is it venture backable? Yes or no? At some point you have to become realistic and say, okay, who else is out there to find me? And that's okay. I think that's totally the right thing to do for the right company.
Fascinating. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, just to put it in context, we're looking for 20% plus returns, where some of these family offices probably would be happy with 7 to 10% stable, manufacturing operations, distribution returns. So, yeah, not like you said, not every business has to be $1 billion business. If we invest at the right price and sell for 30 to 40 to 50 million, we're very, very happy. We get great returns on those exits. But that, those don't make headlines.
Let's pull back a little bit to something a little bit more higher level, slightly higher level than this, because I realize that not everybody here might be as well versed in the granularities of these discussions. So you rightly pointed out, I think so. You rightly pointed out that venture capital is probably one of the most expensive forms of capital, if not the most. So, in the accessibility market, in the disability market, there's already bit of a perception among founders that they get penalized because they're in that space, and so they don't get the valuations that the founders might feel that they deserve. What are you seeing in the market, and what are your thoughts on that? And how do you think about the equity stakes for you as an investor?
Yeah, I think, look, I think this whole market, like any other market, and I think Catherine can kind of speak to other ones as well. You know, I think we have to stop treating it like a separate market. I think we have to start treating it like a technology with a problem that it's solving, and there's a patient population, and there's a reimbursement, there's returns, there's finances, there's regulation. It's like any other technology. I think we have to stop looking at it as a niche, kind of insular type of thing. Very much like, I mean, I think Catherine, you can speak to it as, like female-led founders. Oh, we're going to invest in female-led founders. Like it's no, it's just another company. Like why are we dividing, creating these, or ethnic minorities, or like it's another technology. Like why are we you know breaking it up into other pieces?
Oh
Like I,
boy.
because I meet other I meet other technologies that are outside of the accessibility space, and they too are serving very niche areas, right? And they struggle with the same things. So um,
Um, if all investors starting thinking like that, we wouldn't need you here. But Catherine, what do you think? I know you're in a slightly different market, more B2B a little bit. What do you think?
To be honest, we're I don't think we even try. I think we just are. We're just blind. It's, a good company is a good company for the market, the opportunity, the impact, the customer reach, et cetera, et cetera. We're going to treat that company the way that we would treat any other company, whether the founder's black, brown, disabled, whatever. We really don't delineate. If we put a low valuation on a company, it's because of the opportunity and the exit opportunity, the opportunity in front of us, and then the downstream opportunity we see. Maybe it's earlier stage, maybe they need more help, maybe that it's a niche market, so the exit's not going to be the same. Um, on the women piece, though, I will comment, and people with disability as founders probably, I assume, have their own. There's a different challenge there, but just in particular, women tend to over-explain, they over-pitch, whereas men stay very high level. And as a result of staying more high level, the investor group gets to engage more with that founder. They'll ask more questions. There'll be more of a banter back and forth. Where women, and I'm just making a generalization, and I can say this because I'm a woman, um, we tend to over explain, over justify, talk too much, put too many words on the slide because we want to prove that we're smart enough, we're good enough, we know our stuff. I'm going to answer your question before you even ask it. And we lose out on that banter, that interaction, because the investor's sitting there and they have nothing to ask because we've told them all the answers. And so they walk out of the room and say, that was interesting, but they didn't build a relationship. And it's not good or bad, it's just different, right? And so that's my thesis is that women don't get the same shake because of that kind of quirk.
Let's dive back in. We touched upon the question I'm about to ask a little bit, but in all of the stuff that we've discussed so far, the market sizing, the revenue possibility, venture scalable business, are there situations where a founder comes to you with a very promising startup? And I know this is going to be a little bit of a broad question, but it's intentional. A founder comes to you with a very promising startup, good market size, satisfies most of the things that you look for. You still end up saying no. I'm sure that happens a lot. Why? Tell us about that. Please, Catherine, go ahead.
Okay, so we just looked at one actually a couple months ago, and the team struggled with saying no, but it was obvious to me. And the reason was the team. And the reason we said no is the team had a lot of trouble identifying where their product had the most opportunity, and they were distracted in that they were focused on this was education. So they had a kindergarten opportunity, they had a high school opportunity, they had a university opportunity, they had a corporate opportunity, and it was Canada, US, China. It was all over the place, all over the place, and they were just pursuing all of them. And you can't, as a we're early commercialization, so we like to see kind of this snowball effect. You have 3 customers in the same market segment. You validate the product market fit, because it's hard to validate product market fit with just one customer in one niche area. But if you get 3, 4, 5 all using it at this for the same value proposition, you start to get that, and then you can start branching out. And the founder is already successful. He's sophisticated. He had his vision. He was open to coaching and our advice, but at the time, we just didn't have the capacity to be able to do that. So there.
Thank you for that example. So before we go to you on this question, I want to just mention here that sadly, this is a situation that I've seen happen far more frequently than I would like that to happen. And it's an irony because on one hand, we're telling founders that you need to look at your market size, make sure you have, if not one big market, then multiple big markets that you can expand to. And at the same time, we have to tell the founders that you got to stay focused, that you got to go one at a time. It is a little bit confusing, which is why you have a lot of people to go ask these questions to, which I'm going to ask. But Sohaib, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. What are some unusual reasons like this where you say no?
Sure. And maybe I'll get to that second part after, but I think a lot of the times we pass on opportunities, it's because of chemistry of the people and the teams involved, right? Like sometimes we really, really love the product, we love the idea, we love the market, but at the end of the day, like this is a relationship business, this is a team business, this is interpersonal skills. Building and growing and scaling startups is tremendously difficult. It has been glamorized because it's cool, it's sexy, and obviously there's a ton of momentum, which is great. But to be good and successful, it is tremendously difficult. And, you know, some of your founders here, this. I'm not speaking anything new, but working with investors is also tremendously difficult and arduous. Like there's, when you get to money, things are difficult, and when you get to those difficult conversations, so we really look to make sure, and you won't know until the problem kind of comes to you. You're not going to know exactly how the investor is going to react and how the team's going to react. Having gone through a lot of litigation and lawyers and restructuring and cap tables and lawsuits, removing CEOs, bringing in CEOs. It's a bloodbath sometimes, but I think it is tremendously important to make sure that the ideals of the investor and the ideals of the founder are aligned, because you really need to have that kind of that relationship where it's open, transparent. I just closed a personal investment on a company, an orthopedic company, last Friday. And I would say in my diligence, I spent, there's probably 90% of things I didn't check out because I really liked the founder so much. I had so much trust in him. He was so transparent. He was so easygoing. He was so attentive. Even bad things about his company, he kind of openly disclosed, hey, here's everything that's terrible about my company. So that gave me the confidence. I'm like, okay, like this guy's hardworking. he will solve whatever problem that'll come his way. But I have like full confidence in him, and I actually made a fairly significant investment into this. So sometimes it's just the relationship. I think that's really really important and can't be overlooked.
So I'm glad you brought this up because it relates to something you said earlier, which I wanted to circle back to. ATS Labs exists because we know a lot of startups in this space, in the accessibility and disability space, don't get opportunities elsewhere because of a whole variety of reasons, including just being underestimated very often, incorrectly so, in my opinion. And in other cases, they can't find the answers to the questions that they're seeking in their specific space within accessibility or disability. As a result, they often get excluded from access to investors, to relationships, to funding opportunities. So, specifically for these founders who are getting excluded from these opportunities, how do they go and make those strong, deep, meaningful relationships where an investor is willing to have an open conversation? How do they go and find these very hard to find family offices? Half the times don't even have websites. How do they do that? Sohaib, I'd love to hear from you, and then Catherine.
Sure. So I mean, look, it's easier said than done. There's been many people around the world trying to, compile a list of family offices. I was once in a meeting in Boston at a conference called Resi, and there was a family office lunch happening, and somehow I got invited into it. But you know, at that time there was billions of dollars of capital sitting in a room, not much bigger than this, and there were families literally living down the street from each other who were managing hundreds and $200-300 million of funds, and they had no clue that each other existed. Like even within wealthy families, they don't always know how to get a hold of each other. So no one has a crystal ball. It's not that easy. It is a bit of a hidden kind of piece to it. But one of my kind of advice to generally is accessing investors is you should not be accessing investors when you need money. So many people come to us, and Catherine, I think maybe you can kind of speak to this as well. When did you need the money by? Well, yesterday we're overdue on like $100,000 in pieces. Investors are a relationship. It is very rare to come across to an investor, pitch something, and by the end of the week you get money. It happens in the U.S. Yes, it happens, but certainly in Canada, I think it's a long haul game. Any investment that I've made is someone I've known over a couple of years. Lumera, who isn't represented here, Lumera Ventures, I really like their strategy. They have a database of 13,000 companies that they're tracking at any given time. And, it is rare for them to make an investment until they've known them for at least 3 to 4 years. So, you have to approach investors at a time where you don't need money. And you go to them not with an ask, just to be open. Say, hey, like, I need your help. I need your guidance. Not I need your money. And have that conversation evolve into, hey, I've been following you for a couple of years, you've asked some interesting questions, you've been receptive to my feedback, you've been receptive to my coaching, and that a lot of times will, but a lot of times, but sometimes may translate into investment months and years down the road. So I think that's a fault that I see with a lot of startups where it's I need money, when are you going to invest? It's a long-term relationship that needs to be built in trust.
As the adage in this ecosystem goes, when you need money, ask for advice. When you need advice, ask for money. Catherine?
Yeah, and I would say take advantage of hubs like Mars that offer great resources, advice, and connections to capital. Um, so Mars is great. And depending on where you are in the city, there's these regional accelerators. I would highly recommend connecting to an accelerator. They can give you tips on, your pitch, and connections and relationships to build those relationships over time. And just keep asking everyone and anyone for advice and relationships, and build as you go. I think the door, you know, it's our job as a venture investor to find the deals that no one else is looking at, right? If too many people recommend a deal, it's already, there's something about it that maybe I'm not interested in. But to find those kind of under the radar opportunities is really gold for us. And so just, having those conversations, building those relationships, see who you fit with. Don't take money from anybody. Take money from people that you feel good about, that you have those aligned values.
Thank you. For the folks online, thank you to the folks who are sending all those questions. I am reading those questions. I will get to those questions, but before I do, I want to turn to a little bit more of a positive note. What happens when you make the investment? Especially in this space, I would love to hear your thoughts on how you think about the return potential and exit strategies. Catherine?
Well, I'd like to focus on the impact. So when we make an investment, the first thing we do is say, okay, what is the impact outcome that we're trying to achieve, and how are we going to measure success against that? And for us, the impact is the value proposition. The impact is the product. So using ink block therapy just because it's easy. The impact, the product is the patient feeling better, and that's the impact. And so that's our first thing that we look at and we try and get a handle on. And sometimes the what we measure and how we measure it changes over time, but the goal is how do we support the most impact to the most people in the deepest way possible. And then, frankly, the money just follows. If we deliver a really good impact that affects someone deeply, ideally a large population set deeply, who have very few other choices, to Sohaib's point before, so they're underserved, whether there isn't there's no good alternative, the money comes.
Yeah, money without impact. I mean, once again, to Catherine's point, maybe I should disagree with something you say and just make it more interesting. But look, like you have to make sure that you are hitting the needs of that patient population. If you don't do that, you're not going to get money. Like that's So once again, if you focus on making impact in that patient population, money's going to come. Now, where companies fail to understand is I think assuming that one type of impact will translate into money across different stakeholders. I think that's the kind of mistake a lot of founders make. So, for example, I see tons of companies saying, my technology is going to reduce costs of the healthcare system. Fundamentally, I don't think anyone's going to disagree saying that seems like a good idea. Let's reduce costs. We don't have enough. We have finite money. We have unlimited number of problems. But the reality is reducing costs is a very difficult business model. It's a very difficult thing to pitch to a healthcare system. And it's very difficult to pitch across different healthcare systems. So if you go to the US, they couldn't care less about reducing costs. Like that's just the harsh reality, I'll be honest. Whether you're an accessibility startup or mental health startup or a stroke startup, they're interested in making money. Can you give them enough CPT billing codes to make more money and churn through it? Reduction of costs is a secondary, tertiary outcome. So I think you have to really, really understand your end stakeholder and the business that you're pitching into, whether it's the Ministry of Health, private care, if it's insurance, is it the patient directly? Um, so impact, what you think is impact may not necessarily be impact to the actual customers that you're pitching into. So I think there's a big disconnect for a lot of the companies that I meet. So let's be mindful of that, I think. And then if you do that properly, impact to the right stakeholder, will buy product, hopefully we'll be making money.
So I agree with everything that you both said. But I do want to dive a little bit deeper into this question of returns and exits. Naturally, the founders who are in this space are there for the impact that they know that they can make. But the moment that they accept investor money, external capital, there's an unsaid or more likely a said return expectation or an expectation to have a liquidity event of some sort. So, in your experience, I know Ink Therapy exited, one of my favorite companies out there. So, in your experience in this space in particular, how should founders think about um, much down the road exits? Or should they be thinking about it, or should they just focus on impact and just forget about exits? Do you think that investors are not really putting that pressure about exits? How do you feel about it, Catherine?
Okay, so going back to not every company is a VC backable company, and who do you want the ultimate owner of your company to be? If you want it to be you, then don't take VC money. Because you could grow a nice, stable business with good cash flows. And even if you have, some lenders or some family office investors, you're just paying them a dividend and your company's growing nicely. You own 80, 90%. And there is no exit pressure, nothing, because you're paying your investors back over time. If you do want to take VC money and go do you have a chance to be a billion-dollar company? You might want to look at who you would like to ultimately own your company. So you could look at, personality. Like, some companies say to me, "Oh, I want a female board or a female investor." People solving accessibility issues might want someone with a disability on their board or as an investor. But you could also say, okay, looking at the market, what company do I want to emulate? What would be an ideal partner out there? And so whoever that might be, I can't think of one that has an accessibility angle off the top of my head. But in tech, we say, oh, do you want Google to be your ultimate buyer, for example? And so you could look at building those relationships early with the strategic partnerships, or you could also look at the private equity firms and what their sector focuses are, and then going down on VC side, what their sector focuses are. So do you want an investor that's a generalist, or do you want an investor that has a healthcare focus, or a hardware focus, right? Because there are venture capitalists probably more in the US than in Canada that are okay with hardware focused businesses, or finding that right fit, and then saying to yourself, ultimately, if they were to own more of this company than I do, would I be okay with that?
So it's only exits. I mean, naturally, we haven't really seen IPOs in this space. What do you think?
Yeah, so I think going back to the type of storytelling you want to tell about your company, your investor pool is going to dictate to some extent the direction you want to take your company. And naturally, you will run into friction because venture funds are under pressure to make returns because, they want to show returns and raise their next round of funding and show that there's ROI on the money that they've borrowed and invested, right? So, and sometimes, especially in healthcare and certainly in accessibility companies, healthcare as a whole is a very long road. There's a body of evidence and literature and data and regulatory approvals you have to go through. Sometimes this is at odd with the turnaround times of venture funds. Like this is the push and pull. I think, Catherine, I think you probably experience in your companies as well, where it's not ideally designed to have returns in 4.5 years and kind of away with it. So you have to be cognizant of that. Now, when I trying to advise a certain accessibility startup, so Pearl Interactive, once again, the company that does gaming for kind of children with different abilities, the angle we've been taking is, okay, we're probably not going to get a lot of traction with the generalist venture fund because it's not a general venture fund type of a business. But maybe there's the gaming ecosystem. Maybe there's large gaming developers who want to say, hey, we have not been able to access, have technologies that target certain patient populations before, and this is a way to kind of expand their market reach. So it's a different way. You have to be creative. Your investor may not be your traditional venture fund. It might be someone like EA, the large gaming company that wants to kind of expand into a different market. So the definition of investor, I think, has to be a little bit more fluid too.
Have you gone, just in that example, have you gone to Sony or Epic and said, are you interested in a partnership? Because for them, it's like same product, and they just do the bolts on, and then they expand the market opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the technologies they use is kind of an extension of like what Xbox has. I think one of the controllers. So for Xbox, it's like a perfect way to say, hey, your box will literally be in more homes, but now there's a healthcare side to it. Before it was totally entertainment, but now I mean, and they obviously will want to kind of milk it till the cows come home because it adds a lot of value. Like maybe, I mean, ROI, social value, right? And it's now bringing healthcare metrics into something that previous to that was not really healthcare focused, right?
So is that happening? Just curious.
Many conversations are.
Many conversations. Okay.
Okay, so you talked about finding mission aligned investors almost. Um, and you talked about earlier how to find them, which is, well, the relationships, how you can build them. But I'm curious, for when founders come to you, what should their expectation be towards you as investors? Especially if you've indicated an interest. Is it entirely the founder's job to go out and close around? And I'm asking this because I've seen a couple of situations happen a few times where they're raising, I don't know, 500,000 pre-seed, they hit 400 and then they sort of max out on that. Now, naturally, they can probably close around at 400, not ideal, but that getting to that 100, what should our founders' expectations be generally towards their investors? Can they ask them for help with this, or is it entirely the founder's job?
Okay, this is a tough one. So there's many answers. So one is, what can they do on 400? Can they meet a milestone that will expand their value in some way? Can they test something that gets them to the next level? If they're really stuck at 400, I'd probably advise to say just close on 400 and move and execute. The if they do need the 500, where it's 500 or the whole thing doesn't become valuable. One thing that I've done, I just shared this with one of my colleagues the other day, is I called up, so let's say it's 8 investors for 400. I call up each one of the 8 and I say, I just need an extra 20. Can you give me an extra 20? And then you do that 8 times, and it's more than 100, but you know what I mean? Like, you're not going to get a yes every time, but you could try to just eke out a little bit more, and you say it authentically and passionately, and hopefully you get enough. That worked for me. So you could do that, and I think, it goes back to the storytelling, to the passion, and really um, presenting the opportunity as good for the world, and financial return opportunity. I think then investors perhaps might be more open to doing that.
So, hey, particularly from an angel investor perspective?
So once again, it depends on the investor that you're going to, right? So for a venture fund, if it's a large venture fund, you know, if you're on your last 100,000, like that's probably not what a venture fund might be interested in, to be honest, right? Like a venture fund, they want to make 10, 20 investments. They want to do sizable check sizes. And, it's a lot of effort, time, and money to spend on doing and closing a deal. So for them, like 100,000, I mean, materially is a lot for anyone, but for a venture fund, it may not be worth their time. So sometimes you have to understand the kind of needs of the people that you're going to. So if you have 100,000 to close, going to any VC might not be the right place to do it. Maybe then you have to recalibrate and go to angel networks, go to Maple Leaf Angels, go to Halo Health if you're healthcare related, go to, you know, I don't want to pick on OCI. OCI is not a good group for that either, right? It's you need to calibrate. Yeah, well, man, you're gonna do 500, right? You're not gonna do less than 500, right? So I don't mean to pick on you, Manny, but I am. All right. So the point is, I think you have to really realize, and going back to Catherine's point, can we drive value in whatever you have so far? And sometimes there is a bit of the FOMO that you have to create, and saying, hey, we only have $100,000 left. We've got 8 or 9 investors lined up. It's a really strong story. Let's push it forward. Let's move it forward. Um, so once again, relationships and understanding what your investor is looking for.
No, I get it. No easy answers. A lot of it depends, but I think people are getting used to that. So I'm glad you brought up FOMO. We have a question in the chat from Yamilet Payano. Yamilet says, I am the CEO of SignSpeak. We have created a patented software that translates American Sign Language to voice and voice back to sign language via an avatar. We're truly an AI company using data to power accessibility. How will you suggest we use the current AI hype to drive investment? And sort of a related question to that is, should companies in this space trying to hype up their investment based on the current trends? Catherine?
Oh, this is my favorite question right now. So here's how I would pitch it. So I would say, here's the problem, the size of the problem, the dollars that it's costing society by not translating sign language and vice versa. Here's our solution, and we can solve 80% of the problem, for example. And the way we're going to execute on solving that problem is using all our technology, our insights, our relationships, et cetera, plus AI, right? So AI is a tool to solve the problem. And by using AI early and with the data that they know and have gathered to date, they will quickly get ahead of any competition, right? So that's how you can kind of weave the AI. But AI is just a tool to get there. They got to sell the vision. Don't sell the AI. Sell the sell the solution.
That's a means to an end, not the end. Okay. So
Yeah, exactly. I mean, look, the new trends and fads will come in, ChatGPT, AI, natural language processing. These are all the cool, sexy buzzwords. There's actually a lot of literature, around, if you have these buzzwords in your pitch deck, are you going to get more money? And you do. So unfortunately, it's kind of, it is what it is. But at the end of the day, I think the informed investor is not going to be impressed by the glitter that you try to put on your company. I think once again, it's going down to basics. Am I making impact and can I make money out of it? All these other tools that kind of come and go every 12 months, 18 months, these are just another tool you're going to use in your kind of war chest to kind of solve the problem. It is not the core thesis of your company. A lot of these technologies are now democratized. So, your AI is not going to be better than the company's AI down the street from you. Like it was, it was a distinguishing feature maybe 10 years ago if you had some cool algorithm to pick out some kind of diagnosis from a medical image, but now everyone can do it. We're kind of living in the city where AI was invented, so it's not really a secret sauce anymore.
thank you. Speaking of trends that come and go, we're coming up to the end of the time where I have with you, and then I do want to go to audience questions as well. But speaking of trends that come and go, where do you see the venture capital ecosystem heading, the fundraising landscape heading in Canada over the next 12 months? Again, from the perspective of, excuse me, startups in this space, and everybody here knows when all is said and done, they are in a difficult space. It's not an easy space to raise money in. So, what's the landscape look like in Canada for venture capital fundraising? So, over the next 12 to 14 months.
Yeah, I think it's going to be conservative for the next couple of months. People have predictions on when it's going to turn around. I've heard anything between August, September, October, maybe next year. Everyone kind of has their own kind of idea, but it's a tough time. Having said that, maybe venture funds aren't deploying enough capital or as much capital as they were maybe height of the pandemic or prior to it, but that capital is not going anywhere. Like that capital is still there. And a lot of these venture funds still have pressure to deploy those funds. They can't keep it siloed off forever because they too need to deploy it, get it working, and kind of start to make returns. So it's going to open at some point. We don't know exactly when, but I think when it does, there's going to be a lot of kind of dry powder sitting there, and we've already begun to see that as well. Like, some funds haven't been too bothered about the current kind of climate and they're still operating, like healthcare needs still go on and money's still there and deals are still being done. But maybe it's not being done at the ridiculous multiples of valuations that we were kind of seeing in, middle of the pandemic. A lot of it might just be it's not a down market, but I think the data suggests that it's not a down market, but it's just a course correction. The ridiculous valuations are now being brought back down to reality. But I'm hopeful. I'm an optimist, I guess. But look, start the conversations now. By the time they give you money, the market will improve. So start talking to people today.
I'm sure there are founders sitting in this audience going, there were ridiculous multiples around. I don't know. Go ahead, Catherine.
Yeah, I would agree. So join the accelerator, bootstrap, focus on your tech, identify your team, identify your customers, get to know the problem really, really well. And then when the market's ready, you'll have something to say.
Thank you. My last question for you now, we've covered a lot of different topics. We've given a lot of advice out already. But this is the last question that I always ask when I do these things. Is there anything else that you wish you talked about today with our audience that I didn't go into?
Well, I will say that you guys have the hard job. Our job, we say our job is hard, it is, but the role of the founder is incredibly hard. It's long. It can be very punishing, not just on the fundraising side, but just selling to customers, bringing in talent, managing the talent, growing, etc. So, we appreciate you. We appreciate your passion and what you're trying to do and what the problems you're trying to solve because they are important. So get the support you need, the advice you need. And if the first idea doesn't take, don't give up. Try again.
We'll come to you, audience, for your questions, but Sohaib, go ahead.
Yeah, you know, okay, once again, we're kind of saying the same thing, but I too have seen a tremendous amount of burnout with founders over the last year or two. I've seen some very good companies doing very well, really, really well executed kind of teams, just burnout from really competent CEOs. So I would really urge you guys, if you are in a kind of a startup to kind of recognize, you know, those limitations, those issues, network with other founders who are going through similar things. I think events like this are critical to that because it's kind of you're amongst your kind of peers doing, going through a like-minded experience. And I would really encourage, we didn't really get into it too much today, but, there's a lot of talent in adjacent companies. I would love to see more cross pollination between startups. We talk about building something that isn't large enough. Maybe one company can't solve all the problems, but there certainly are enough technologies sitting in our backyard. If we combined a company or two together, collectively, 1 + 1 isn't two. It's a multiple of that, right? So really kind of encourage you to kind of work together and find collaborations. And it's not always in the form of an M&A and a large tech, but certainly there's multiple creative ways to work and kind of combine your technologies together. As investors, we always try to encourage it, but um, it's very difficult. It just doesn't happen.
Thank you. Audience, questions from you? Questions? There was a hand right up there.
You mentioned earlier about the kid with cerebral palsy who can raise his hand, and there's like the new wave of immersive technologies, VR, AR, their potential to kind of equalize those kind of disabilities and differently abled people. I want to know what kind of investments have you guys made or seen companies that are kind of disrupting this space and accessibility? Yeah.
So to clarify, like, are you asking specifically for VR or just accessibility as a whole?
Yeah, like VR and accessibility. Have you seen that kind of crossover?
I've seen maybe this is just my opinion. I've seen VR and AR see a big kind of uptick in like 2019, 2018, 2019. I think 2019 as a whole was a big uptake in neurotech. Neurotech was a big focus. A lot of funds created theses just around neurology focused kind of technology. Um, I don't mean to sound pessimistic, but I don't see many of those technologies kind of become standard of care yet, or maybe we're still waiting for them to kind of transpire. So I saw a big kind of boom of that kind of technology coming across all different markets. So I've seen through OBI, I think there was one with stroke rehab and VR. In the mental health space, there are certainly hundreds of, maybe not, but certainly dozens of companies. But I haven't seen them take on. And I think part of the issue is the upfront capital to kind of bring them into play. And I certainly think, the clinical validation behind a lot of these kind of things, there's a few that have it, but most don't. So I think to create a body of literature around that convinces doctors to say, hey, you have this particular medical condition, use VR to solve it. I think, but I'm putting on my clinical hat now, I think a lot of doctors are still skeptical about its use case. Not to say you shouldn't try, but so my take is I'm a bit pessimistic about it. I just haven't seen it translate yet. So I don't know if it never will or if we're just waiting for them to to reach that point. And sorry if you have a VR company. I don't know if you do, but I hate I hate to rain on your parade if that's the case. We'll talk after if you do. Don't worry.
I would say it's really the hardware component and the customer adoption. I think that's, you had that early adopter, the early keeners, but to get mass adoption, to get to that fully immersive VR AR, you're stuck with this hardware component. So we're starting to see the same outcomes with a digital only play, like Lucid being a good example, where you just listen to music and you get the outcomes. So I mean, for us in particular, we're looking for the non-hardware or the use your existing hardware. So plug it into your iPhone or your Apple Watch or Fitbit, etc., versus buy a new piece of hardware to enable the outcome.
So I just want to add for folks on the hardware piece. It's hard. It's very hard, and a lot of investors will shy away from it. But it's not impossible. If you're building hardware, don't think that you can't do it. Don't think that nobody will invest in it. There are investors I know for a fact who have invested in it. There are ways to make that a little bit more palatable for venture capital. There are ways to make that a little bit more affordable in cases where hardware, the initial setup cost is $4,000. There are ways around it. So if you're facing something like that, come talk to me and we'll chat some more. I
Thank
see
you for
there's a
saying
question.
that, by the way,
Yeah,
because I don't want to come across too pessimistic on that. So thanks for saying that.
no worries. I see there's a question from Ilana who's joining us virtually. Ilana, go ahead.
Okay, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, hi. First of all, thanks to the two presenters. The information you've imparted today has been absolutely fabulous and really practical and very helpful. My question for you is funding a startup as a woman with a disability, and which is also a solution, not hardware. It integrates into iPhones, Androids. Um, do you have any advice sort of in terms of the approach? I, I don't like to make this big statement. I'm a woman with disability and it's very rare for us to be in this space. Yeah, it is, but that's not the problem and that's not the solution. So I'm sort of wondering where I emphasize that, or should I even be mentioning that at all? It's a big part of the story, but how important is it to an investor?
Well, I would say it comes up as part of how well you understand the problem. And so
Okay.
I'd pitch it as here's the problem and here's our solution, and we understand that this solution will work because I personally have experienced the problem. And so I would be, a customer, or you just understand it as a user, for example, if you're not necessarily the customer. So I would
Right.
suggest you frame it that way.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect answer, Catherine. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can I follow up a bit here?
Please.
Is it, do you know of any like particular, I've just never been able to find anything that's for women with disabilities. I've just never been able to find anything in particular for our demographic in terms of funding.
So I think you are going to be looking for like a needle in the haystack, right? With when you have those two kind of layers and filters, I think you are getting kind of subspecialized niche,
Yeah,
but not even companies. Now you're getting subspecialized niche in investors, right? Like, so I think you have to maybe take a step back and not look for that niche investor. I think you have to find a way to translate what you're building
right,
into a broader problem that any investor, maybe not any investor, but certainly a larger subset of investors will want to look at.
right,
Because I think you're going to pigeonhole yourself in to maybe two people, three people in the world that
right,
maybe kind of have those layers, right? So
right,
so um, so like to Varun's point earlier, I think sometimes companies get too insular and too focused on two set of like a narrow set of a problem. I think even investors, you don't want to over engineer that there's only a few people in the world who might want to invest in it, right? So
Oh, I don't care if no, I'm not speaking about them personally. I was wondering if any funds, like any, like there's big funds out there for stuff like that, but I've never
Um,
seen that in particular.
so this is Varun speaking. Stay tuned for the next component of today's discussion. I have something to share that might be of interest there.
Okay,
I
thank
see
you
more
to our
questions.
presenters. Thank you.
Hello, Matthew here from Prova. Thank you for the presentation today and the thought. I have a question around down rounding. What I'm seeing in the early stage space is a lot of companies that are, post revenue generating, entering sort of the angel space. They're underperforming and they're entering the angel space for investment, and it makes pre-revenue companies have to compete with that sort of risk. Well, just wondering in terms of deal flow, a lot of those companies are disappearing. What will happen in the next 8 months? Will there be more opportunities for those that can weather the storm stage?
It's a good question. So I mean, I wouldn't automatically take the later stage company at the same price as the early stage company that hasn't necessarily proven themselves out as completely, because you have potentially an underperformer comparing with someone who hasn't yet performed. Right. So I think there's more than one way to look at it. It's never apples to apples. There's different competitive forces, different team dynamics, different market applications. On the down rounds, we, for us, we'd be interested in funding a down round if it's simply a market shift. So beyond the company's control, if it's something that the company has something to do with, like, what's a good example? No, technology development took too long, or regulation came in that they should have seen, or I don't know. So it all depends on why the down round. So many kind of follow up questions, hard to answer. Like, I don't agree.
Look, I think down rounds for some funds um, can be opportunistic chances, right? So as long as you do the checks and balances to make sure, are we down rounding because of some fundamental flaw in the company that can't be correct, i.e., bad team, or bad product market fit, lack of reimbursement codes, or no code at all, or inherent risk we didn't take into account, right? As long as there's nothing fundamentally wrong in the technology, I think a lot of venture funds will actually opportunistically look at a down round as an opportunity. Now, when you're investing, down round is a bad word, because you're trying to prevent down round, right? Like, so you're trying to do everything in your power to prevent it. But I actually think for the right people, a down round would be an opportunity. And I think how you position it and how you sell the story behind it, if you can alleviate their concerns about it being something inherently wrong in the company, I think it could actually be quite interesting. I mean, thousands of companies are having down rounds because that during the pandemic there's ridiculous expectations valuation. So
I'm seeing those companies flood the early stage investor community.
yeah, yeah.
It makes it hard for an earlier stage company like me to compete with them because they're already in market and just underperforming. And those earlier stage investors are not necessarily as sophisticated as a VC, right?
Right.
They see that as well, it's less risk. But it's easy to spend your money. It's harder not to spend your money, right? And to make cuts.
So that sounds like a conversation to be continued. Um, it's a fair question, but I do want to be respectful of time. So, Catherine, Sohaib, thank you so very much for spending your time with us today. I know you both have, I think, 6 jobs each, so I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here and sharing your thoughts. Thank you. Folks, stay on. There's still more, a little bit more that I want to share with you, and it's going to relate to some of the questions that came up today. But, Catherine,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you for having us. Thank you for listening to us. Thank you.
Good job.
All right. So, why am I still asking you to stay seated and maybe not leave the Teams meeting? Because this is usually something done at the end, but I'm not going to wait for the end. Um, let's see. There we go. Okay. Uh, we did this even for free because we believe in the value of this thing, and we believe in the value of this thing because people asked us for it, and they asked us for it through feedback forms that they submitted at past events. Allow us to continue doing these events for you for free by sharing your feedback about what's important to you. Please feel free to use the QR code that's up on the screen or use the URL accesstosuccess.ca /meetup feedback. We'll continue this discussion for a short 10 minutes where I want to share something with you that we're working on right now, which is the Accessibility Investors Database, or AID. This is the world's first database of investors interested in investing in accessibility tech. We build this specifically in a way that's useful for entrepreneurs building accessibility innovations. We'll build this so that you can sort and filter investors that have indicated that they're interested in the space through their location, through their target investment regions, through target stages of investments, their areas of interest, and whether or not they are an impact investor. What I want to point out is that this database is not necessarily just specifically limited to what people might traditionally think of as the accessibility world or the disability world. It's also going to be very relevant and applicable for startups in age tech, care tech, neurotech, hear tech, all of these different areas. And we know that because these are startups that have actually gone through our program. And I'm raising this with you today because we are currently in the data collection phase until the end of June. So if you have investors that you know are interested in this, please let them know to participate in AID. If you have investors that you've spoken with, whether or not they are already investing in your startups, or if you know other startups where these investors have invested in those startups, tell them about AID. Because when you share your investors, others will do the same thing. We have a partnership with the Inclusive Innovation Network, which is a global alliance of disability tech accelerators around the world, including in Australia, Hong Kong, Kenya, India, New Zealand, and probably some more countries that I'm forgetting. And the reason that I'm bringing this up is because through the Inclusive Innovation Network, we want to distribute this database for free to startups around the world and have investors from around the world have access to the same information. We intend to release this database to the public for free in July, assuming we are able to get the community to help us collect the data. This is intentionally designed to be a form which investors can submit. It's going to take less than a minute to do it versus us going out and using our research to just shoehorn investors willingly or unwillingly into this database. So the people you'll find here will have made a stated commitment or an interest to investing in this space. Please spread the word by going to our website and going to the Accessibility Investors database. Help us democratize access to funding for accessibility investors like yourselves. Share your feedback. Please go to the QR code or the URL. Let us know how we did, what we can do better for you in the future, what are the topics you want us to talk about, and let's stay in touch. To the folks joining us virtually, thank you so much for sitting in on this conversation. I appreciate your time. For the folks who are here, we have this beautiful space for another 30 minutes. Please feel free to help yourself to a lot of food that we purchased for you. Go ahead. There's again cookies with peanuts. Be careful of that. Stay away from that. But thank you so much. Have some good conversations, make some new friends, and go away with some interesting ideas. Thanks.